Good evening, Gulati san. I hope you're well.
Yeah, I'm doing well, thank you, and I hope the same for you and all the people who've tuned in.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your kind wishes. Everyone at Overdrive is doing well as well, and I hope all of our viewers are doing well as well. In fact, Gulati san, we spoke last year. It was during the lockdown again, and we are back, and we are unfortunately still speaking to each other only, digitally and through these screens. So it's still some time away that we actually meet in person, but. I think the time is still right to post quite a few queries for you. Ever since we talked about Toyota coming on board on the OVERDRIVE Digital Show and talking about the hybrid tech, a lot of queries have come through. So what I'm going to begin with is the most common query that everyone has. Uh, Most of the industry right now is talking about skipping the hybrid bandwagon altogether. They are saying that the most common answer that we're getting is why spend that extra money doing battery as well as an internal combustion engine? Why not just do the internal combustion engines for now and directly jump onto the EV bandwagon, because that is what the horizon looks like for us. So what are your thoughts on this? The hybrid is, of course, the midway point, but what are your arguments for this particular scenario right now?
Right. First of all, the reason that we everybody is trying to do electrification, we all know this, it's to reduce fossil fuel consumption and to reduce carbon footprints as well as pollution. So that's what we're all trying to achieve. Now, the second point we must remember is it's when you talk about electrification and electrified vehicles, you're really talking about a family of technologies. What's common amongst them is that they all have one electric powertrain. So hybrid, because it kind of um, seeks to be independent of charging infrastructure, has onboard charging by way of a full-fledged petrol powertrain, gasoline powertrain. The battery electric vehicles get rid of that and are fully electric. And if you go to PHEVs, you have a higher range. And the hydrogen vehicle, you replace the gasoline powertrain with a hydrogen tank and a fuel cell stack. Now, the if you look at the projections going forward, EV has taken good traction in the past 1 year despite the pandemic. The global penetration is around 3%. If you look at any forecast, whether it is IEA or whether it is the forecast by BNEF, the latest forecast, or BCG, one thing is clear, that the drive towards electrification, which includes all technologies, is basically going to be driven by the regulatory forces as well as the incentives, etc., that our governments are kind of giving, because the technologies continue to be much costlier and they do have still do have challenges going forward. Now, if you look at the near-term projections globally, what you see is that electrics, are going to pick up, but the hybrids are also picking up at the same times, almost at the same ratio. This year, it's going to be 4% global share for hybrids from a powertrain point of view. Same for EVs. Now, as of course time passes on, the battery prices comes down, technology learning curves kick in, costs come down, infrastructure gets created. EVs will become definitely pick up, but hybrids remain an option going forward. Uh, then the other point we must remember is that, uh, for instance, in India, if you need to go in the direction of electrification with Make in India, you need to have the ability to invest for EV powertrain parts in the country. And right now, the problem is a vicious circle where, primarily because of limited offtake of BEVs, primarily in the PV segment, which I'm talking about. So, lack of demand means lack of investment viability. If you follow the route of all electrified technologies, the aggregation of demand at the part level is much better. And globally, it's seen that this aids and helps in investment viability and, in fact, sharpens the offtake curve for all electrified technologies. So it's not really about EV versus hybrid. In my view, it's about how fast you can displace ICE with an electrified vehicle which is much better in terms of emissions and fossil fuel consumption.
Right, but when we talk about these numbers, one thing also comes to mind that hybrid, the penetration of hybrid vehicles, or even the portfolio. When you look at hybrid vehicles globally, there are quite a few models on offer, and we are talking about everything from small hatchbacks going up all the way to luxury cars. But when we look at the Indian scenario or the Indian market, you have a few micro hybrid or mild hybrid vehicles, but otherwise, a proper hybrid, the least that you would have to spend for would be a Toyota Camry at the moment. So, that is another set of questions, or most common questions that we are getting on this topic is when will the hybrid technology come down to a price point where it becomes affordable for everyone? When you say that the numbers are increasing for hybrids globally, and you're talking about the 4% global penetration for hybrids, India, it again comes back to that same argument of why do battery and an ICE together when the prices are that high? Will you be able to bring it down to a level that can actually become that affordable?
Yeah. Thanks for that question. I think you're right. It's something that's asked very frequently. First of all, I'd like to clarify that when I'm talking about hybrids, I'm really talking about the strong hybrids, the proper hybrids, not the mild ones. That's a totally different technology. Now, in India, we were the first OEM to bring in a strong hybrid, and we started assembly manufacturing in the country with Camry. As with any new technology that's costlier, we did our initial market entry at a pretty high segment. That's usually the way it's done. And that was basically to gauge the technology acceptability amongst consumers, as well as to test the technology in Indian driving conditions. So that's why we entered Indian market with the Camry. And our experience has been that the acceptance was really good. The potential is really very good going forward. In fact, in that small segment, we initially had Camry petrol only, and our share was around 30-40% of that particular small segment. And within a few months, we didn't have any orders for Camry petrol, all orders for hybrids, and our market share, segment share, increased to more than 60%. So clearly establishing the acceptability of the product. And this was, of course, prior to the GST coming in, where at a time point when there was a good incentive from a taxation point of view to hybrids also. Post that, of course, there have been some changes to the taxation, which has made the technology much more expensive. And that's one of the reasons why the entry of other models, not only by Toyota, but other OEMs, has also kind of been pushed back a bit. Going forward, we are confident about the acceptability and the success of this technology in the country. As we work towards bringing in this technology, we are very aware and working hard to try and make sure that we do so by trying to do maximum localization. It not only helps build the local ecosystem, but it's also helps bring down the costs, which therefore improves the affordability and the offtake of the vehicle. Going forward, we are bullish on this technology from the lessons we've seen globally and the developments that are happening around. Uh, that's what I would like to kind of submit.
Okay. But Gulati-san, especially when we talk about hybrids, Toyota is certainly in the forefront, not just in the country, but even if you were to look at the global portfolio that Toyota has, again, there is a strong hybrid portfolio that you have for various vehicle sizes. So what stops Toyota from bringing in any of the smaller vehicles to the Indian market, which would also have a hybrid powertrain? Why do you still have the starting point at a Camry? You also have briefly had the Prius for a couple of generations, but why can't it go any lower than that, especially when you do have that portfolio at your disposal globally? Of course, I know there are challenges involved, but would you like to maybe shed some light on those challenges, on why can't we get those Toyota hybrids to the Indian market, the affordable ones?
We are working towards it, and we will be, of course, trying to meet the consumer expectations in terms of the vehicles and technologies that they demand going forward. So it's only a matter of, I guess, time, and we would be working trying to get more vehicles, more products which meet the expectations of the consumers, both from a technology point of view as well as performance and from a price point of view. uh, like I said, even if you look at the domestic passenger vehicle uh, market from a electrification perspective, uh, currently, last year around 4 to 5 thousand electric vehicles were sold. The projections from BNEF going forward are that by 2025 the market would be around 55,000 units for BEVs uh, per year, new vehicle sales, translating to roughly just shade under 1% of the market share. 2030, it's expected to be around 8%. What I'm getting at is it's a developing market for electrified vehicles because the challenges of introducing newer technologies are much more stiffer in the Indian market as compared to other markets globally. That's primarily because of the uniqueness of the Indian market, both in terms of the demographics, the consumer sensitivity to price as well as value proposition, the level of development of the local ecosystem, including the infrastructure for charging, etc. So this applies equally to all electrified technologies. We believe going forward traction, it's a time that we are likely to find traction going forward, and with that, hopefully, we would be able to bring newer and more models, which we can explore the possibilities.
Right. Okay. So we'll take the first question from one of our viewers. It talks about the cross branding strategy between Suzuki and Toyota. Now, both of you are working together on quite a few vehicles. We've seen the synergies already with cars like the Glanza and the Urban Cruiser. Now, does this, when you say that you're working towards making hybrid technology more affordable, does this relation between you and Suzuki also come into play? Are you looking at co-developing something on this front?
Look, the alliance is both about cooperating and competing. So we continue to compete while we cooperate. It's also about trying to bring synergies in terms of the strengths of both the companies that is available. So, for instance, from a Toyota point of view, it's really about technology. We've been in the space of electrification for over 3 to 4 decades. In fact, if you look at the entire portfolio of electrified vehicles, which primarily in our case is strong hybrids, we're the largest seller of electrified vehicles till date, with having sold more than 17 million electrified vehicles, which has given us tremendous experience and learning on the various aspects of electrified vehicles and the components, which are common across all technologies. Whereas Suzuki has world level class, top level competencies when it comes to scale of operations and achieving that at a very aggressive and very competitive price point. So these two synergies can definitely work together going forward. One of the aspect is to also work in alignment, trying to bring in electrification. And what we aspire to do is to work towards mass electrification, because 5, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 electrified vehicles displacing equivalent number of ICE is not really going to do it for the country. So our aspiration, of course, is to try and see if we can work together for mass electrification, with the key objective being with making in India whatever we do, not only for the Indian market but also for outside.
Right. In fact, I'm going to take one question from Mr. Shubham Ghosh. Producer, let's just first take the question from Shubham Ghosh Hazra. Since you mentioned emissions right now, since you said that just a few electrified vehicles is really not going to help offset, the carbon footprint. this is more on the technical lines, where he asks that the hybrid uses a partial battery system, of course, and after a little bit of pull, the electric motor, it's essentially the engine that takes over and not the electric motor anymore. So how much does, what kind of a emissions drop can we really expect from hybrids? So I'm going to rephrase that a little bit. When we talk about, say, the current BS6 engines, which are, the government is really pushing all car makers to make their internal combustion engines as clean as possible, and the BS6 engines have dropped the emission levels quite a bit. But vis-a-vis those engines, a hybrid, for example, the Camry that we just spoke about, a Camry petrol versus the Camry hybrid, what is the emissions drop like? What is the gain like? Let's put it that way.
Okay, some time back, there was a, a global event organized by ICAT, which is a Government of India testing agency, and they had invited OEMs to submit electrified technologies along with a comparable ICE. The objective was to see the improvements in terms of emissions, fossil fuel consumption, and their general performance, both in the lab as well as on the road. They published their report, and I'm just citing these figures from this report. So, as far as a strong hybrid is concerned, as per their tests, this strong hybrid is capable of running 40% of the distance and 60% of the time in electrified mode with the engine shut off, with using a battery that is, probably 1/10 of what you need in a BEV. Now, what that does is that it leads to tremendous amount of efficiency and reduction in emissions. The fossil fuel reduction that was measured by the testing agency was in the range of 35 to 50%, depending upon size of the vehicle. And mind you, this fuel efficiency gain only improved on the road conditions, because ICE tends to lose out efficiency much more, and that's where the hybrid gains. In terms of emissions, from a carbon emission point of view, similar levels of savings, because carbon emission and fossil fuel saving is primarily, the two sides of the same coin. As far as the regulated emissions are concerned, PM 2.5, etc., the strong hybrid level of emissions is almost 1/10 of that of a comparable BS6 vehicle. And mind you, we had given a vehicle which was of an earlier vintage. So that vehicle was actually using a BS4 fuel. So even with a BS4 fuel at that time, this vehicle was giving emissions, regulated emissions, PM 2.5, etc., which are almost 1/10 of the emission from a comparable ICE. So I hope that answers the question.
Right, it does. In fact, Gulati-san, I'm going to ask you, we are going to take one more question from Apur Chetty. So when we talk about mass electrification, globally, what is Toyota betting the future on? Is it fuel cells? Is it hybrids? Or is it pure EVs? Because we've seen all these technologies, of course. I'm sure each is one step towards the mass electrification process, but we would like to hear it from you. What is Toyota betting big on of all these between all these technologies?
We bet big on serving our customers to their satisfaction. So customer acceptance for us is going to be the primary driver. We have all these technologies, whether it's the hybrid or a BEV or the top end, which is the hydrogen vehicle. We believe going forward, in even as far as 240 onwards, the various technologies are going to coexist globally. That's basically because the consumer requirements are very diverse, and consumer will pick the technology which meets his needs at a most optimum level. Having said that, the other point we would like to also emphasize is no two countries are same, because each country will have a very different set of local dynamics in terms of its own energy mix, resources available to it, and its own set of national priorities, unique priorities, which would be over and above, let's say, the general priorities of fossil fuel reduction and carbon emission or pollution reduction. For instance, in case of India, it's also about manufacturing. It's also about trying to uh, get parallel benefits from other segments of the economy, and hence such economies will have also other options evolving. And this is evident from the recent developments around ethanol blending and a lot of excitement around flexi fuel vehicles, because in a way that also helps to move away from fossil fuels and also helps to reduce carbon emissions. So we have all the technologies. We would be working towards providing the technology that best meets the requirements of the consumer and the energy mix in each different countries, in each of the countries, which is going to be unique.
Right. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Someone's just asked, what about a hybrid Fortuner? I'm going to build a little bit more on that. Just the way you said, no two countries are same. Of course, India has its own requirements. The market has its own requirements. Our requirement from an SUV is probably different from, say, what an Australia would have or what the United States would have. Maybe we don't take our SUVs out in the wild as often. Maybe we don't take them road tripping as frequently as maybe some of the other countries do, probably because the distances may not be that long. But you know the country best. You know the scenario best. You know what people do with our SUVs here. So in that scheme of things, how would a hybrid Fortuner or a hybrid Innova or any hybrid SUV work in our scheme of things? Because primarily what I believe is, yes, there are quite a few people who will do justice to these vehicles, who will do with SUVs what they're meant to do, but most others will probably just buy it because it casts a particular image, or these SUVs are the in thing right now. They prefer it to hatchbacks or sedans across different price points. So in your opinion, would a hybrid SUV make sense? If yes, in what kind of a price category or in what kind of a size category would a hybrid SUV make sense?
Okay, let me answer it slightly differently. Deviating from a specific product
Okay.
point of view. Uh, Again, it's really around consumer acceptance, which is determined by a number of factors, which are extraneous determinants. For instance, the local regulations and the local taxation structure, etc., which have a huge bearing on the kind of products that you design and the kind of products that you roll out, because that will shape the acceptance of the consumer immensely. So going forward on a generic basis, if we want to look at what technologies are really going to be having advantage in terms of usage and size, I think that's where the question is. If you do a matrix of size of the vehicle and the distance it travels or the number of people it is capable of carrying, then smaller cars traveling shorter distances would naturally require smaller batteries and can be charged, uh, can have lower range anxiety issues, and hence as battery prices continue to fall, that particular segment can become something of a EV segment, if I may use that term, more amenable to EVs. However, when you look at larger vehicles with higher payloads, with greater weight, traveling longer distances, requiring very different usage patterns, there the battery volume or the amount of battery that you need comes into play, along with the range anxiety, etc., which is going to persist, whatever we say. There you would have other technologies like hybrids and plugins also really coming out trumps in terms of an absolute comparison. And when you go to much larger vehicles, something like trucks that do intercity travel or buses, there in near future we see that hydrogen is really going to become very competitive, perhaps 8 to 10 years or even less going down the
Okay.
road. So it's really going to be a bouquet of technologies. In India, for instance, this blending, ethanol blending is really taking off, and we already have an aspiration of 20% ethanol blending by 2025. What it means is you straight away reduce 25% of your petrol or diesel requirements. That is, a huge volume. It would be, probably a factor of 100 times over than electrification during this time frame. even that is going to be something of a determinant in our market, as is going to be the gaseous fuels, because huge amount of investments have been made by the country in infrastructure related to CNG, and probably we're now also listening and hearing about LNG coming in. So I think it's going to be a much more varied bouquet of technologies going ahead, and basically the best fit would determine consumer acceptance.
Okay. I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. We have one from Mr. Mayur Shah and another from Dr. Suryavanshi. These are to do with batteries. So, is Toyota working on interchangeable batteries for cars? And also, when we talk about hybrids, what is the fate of the batteries which are used in this particular technology? And does that at the we are not talking about tailpipe, but the overall emissions, does that again cause larger impacts on the environment?
Okay, I mean, very important question. The batteries we use in hybrids are both the lithium ion as well as the nickel metal hydride. We currently give a very long. These batteries usually last out the life of the vehicle. That's around, usually around 8 to 15 years. They are designed in a very different way in terms of how they operate, because these batteries would be charging discharging in a nanosecond time period. So you won't have issues of depth of deep discharging, and their level of range of operation would be at a particular level, which gives them longevity. But having said that, for all electrified vehicles, the two things are going to be very critical. One is the manufacturing of batteries itself, which, if you factor it in, makes electric vehicles today less environment friendly, even as compared to ICE, because the manufacturing process of batteries is very energy intensive, and there are environmental issues around it in that value chain. So that's one challenge. The other challenge is when you have vehicles reaching the end of life, what do you do with these batteries? If they're not really managed in a proper way, there would be another challenge. However, I think going forward, how we look at it is we have an environment global vision around 6 challenges, one of which is working towards a circular economy. So, and the other one is around life cycle zero carbon emission from what we do. So not only are we taking responsibility as a corporate on the carbon emission of our products, of our manufacturing, but of the entire value chain. So what it means is working towards use of optimal materials, alternate materials, which kind of bring down the intensity of the impact on the environment and energy, and also working towards putting these batteries to good use when they come to their end of utility for the automotive space. So for electrics, for instance, you would need a battery change around 6 to 7 years, depending upon how much you've driven and how you've driven. These batteries still are, some of these batteries in the cells therein still are good, are possibly good for reuse in stationary applications. There is potential, and there are people working towards putting that to use. And there is also an ecosystem which is coming up now towards recycling of the materials from these batteries. We, like I said, are committed to the goal of circular economy and minimizing the carbon impact to near zero for the life cycle of our products. And hence, as a part of that, not only globally, but in India, we, as a part of the Toyota Suzuki Alliance, we are coming up. We have already starting to put up end of life vehicle facility for recycling of vehicles, and also end of life facility for lithium ion batteries, advanced batteries, so that we can recycle them and reharness the materials from them.
Okay, Gulati-san, we'll take one final question, and it's come from Sai Siva, who asks us, what will be Toyota's hybrid target market? I think he's asking about the target segment that you would ideally want to be in India. And because hybrids have been out of reach for the Aam Aadmi, the same question that we began with. So let's put it this way, that if you wanted to have presence in multiple segments, which you already have, but from a hybrid perspective, what is that ideal segment that Toyota India would like to participate in or like to have presence in?
like I said, our aspiration is to kind of contribute towards mass electrification. And in order to do that, you really need to be in mass segments with the electrified technology. So I guess that answers that question in that way. It is not going to be easy, it's going to be challenging, but we are working towards it. Uh, and one key element, like I said, is working towards investing to try and create the local ecosystem. We are trying to find ways to do that. After all, investment viability is also something that we have to deal with. But our aspiration and our goal is basically to look at segments which are of much more mass appeal than the initial segments where we entered, because those were market testing kind of segments.
Right. In fact, Mr. Gulati, I think hybrid itself was challenging enough, but Toyota did show us the way. They did bring in the Prius, they did bring in the Camry, and we are glad that you are continuing to make sure that this endeavor of yours to bring in electrified vehicles is up and running. And we wish you all the very best to bring in those mass electrified vehicles, because I'm sure the entire market is waiting for it. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for all the insightful answers and to take these live questions after your work hours. So it was really a pleasure having you on the Overdrive show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, and it's been a real privilege and a pleasure for me. Really very invigorating in terms of getting those questions, and I hope I've done justice to them. But thank you for having me, and I'd like to wish everybody all the very best and stay safe.
Thank you so much. Good night.